as a core set, M19 is not that complicated in deck building, so one of the biggest edges you can get is not playing the bad cards that other people will be playing. Therefore, I'd like to start by going over the bad cards. First up, we've got Ajani's Welcome, Isolate, and Rustwing Falcon. Ajani's Welcome, you're going to look at it and you're going to be like, oh, I've got all these things that pay off life gain. But this card just requires a ton of synergy. And in a pre-release, instead of a draft deck, you're just not going to have enough synergy to pay off this thing. 99.9% of the time, you shouldn't play it, even if you think that you should. Next up, we've got Isolate. It's way too narrow. The other thing is, it only defeats things that have 1 CMC, which is to say things that probably are not that big of a problem for you. Lastly, we've got Rustwing Falcon. Now, the reason that we're not too interested in this card is that in Sealed, the games are just slower. So this thing is just going to get outpowered, and in Draft you might find a place for it, but otherwise, don't go for it. Next up, we've got Sun Cleanser, Gearsmith Prodigy, and Mirror Image. Now, Sun Cleanser just has nothing to do with this format. This is just a constructed card 100%. The next card, Gearsmith Prodigy, really needs a lot of synergy. This has kind of the same problem as the Ajani's card from the previous. There's just not going to be that much synergy in, 99% of sealed decks for this one to be one you want to play. Our last one here, Mirror Image, the reason why it's not good is because these effects are good when you can copy your opponent's stuff, so you make sure that you always get the best thing in play. But if you're, for example, behind and you don't have a creature because yours has been removed, it's unplayable. If your opponent is beating you in the air with something big and you've just got some stuff on the ground, this doesn't help at all. So that's why Mirror Image is not as exciting as when you can copy your opponent's stuff, so I would not play it. Next up, we've got Mistcaller, Omniscience, and Psychic Corrosion. Now, Mistcaller is another one of these cards that's completely designed for Constructed, has nothing to do with this format. Do not play Mistcaller. Omniscience looks like, hey, maybe it could be playable. The thing is, once you have enough mana to play Omniscience, your hand is pretty much empty, and you could play any one single card that you have after that point, just from drawing from your deck. So don't play Omniscience. It doesn't actually do anything. You have to really be cheating it into play in Legacy and such. Our last card, Psychic Corrosion, I just want to say, don't play this unless you have two. You gotta have two or more of these guys. If you just put one in your deck for fun, you would be more likely to win the game by just having another creature, no matter how bad it is. Even if it was Mistcaller. You just don't want that. It's not a random win condition. It's a random, I am worse at winning the way that my deck generally works condition. Next up, we've got Tellurian Scholar, Fraying Omnipotence, and Infernal Reckoning. I'm bringing up Tellurian Scholar not because it's literally horrifically unplayable, but because it was actually decent in the last set, and a lot of people might kind of remember that feeling. It is much worse in this set, because the last set had all sorts of payoffs for playing wizards. This set does not have any, so it is the crappy 2-3 for 3. It's not as good as it was last set. Next up, we've got Fraying Omnipotence. This, you might put it in your deck without realizing that you have to do this too. So it hurts you almost as much as it hurts them. It's very difficult for this card to be good for you and bad for them. Because let's say you're playing it like a Wrath, and they have a bunch of creatures out, and you're like, you have to sacrifice half of them. Well, if they have a bunch of creatures out, and you don't, that probably means that you've got more cards in hand. So you're going to end up discarding. It's very difficult for this to be always good for you and bad for them, so I just wouldn't play it. The last card is Infernal Reckoning, and this set just doesn't have nearly enough colorless creatures for this to make sense. Next up, we've got Sovereign's Bite, Alpine Moon, and Double Cast. Now, Sovereign's Bite is one of those things that's going to be good in really high synergy decks with the life gain theme, but those decks pretty much won't exist in sealed, so I would not play this card. I'd rather just play, a random decent creature. Alpine Moon, 100% constructed card, should not even touch it. Double Cast is a card that always looks awesome. Seriously, this always looks like it's the bee's knees, but it just simply isn't. There'll be so many times where you just won't have something that you want to double cast. Like, let's say you've got a removal spell, they've got a creature, great. Well, you don't want to double cast it because they only got one creature anyway. So, or you just won't have a spell to double cast. It would be better if it was just any kind of crappy removal spell or whatever. Combat trick. So don't play double cast because there's just going to be so many instances where it's not good. Next up, we've got Root Snare, Scape Shift, and Amulet of Safekeeping. Now, Root Snare, there's a whole bunch of cards that have been printed like this. They have never been good. And this one is the worst templating of them, which is where it's not just their creatures that don't deal combat damage, just no combat damage happens. So you can't even get any surprise blocks where their stuff dies or anything like that. This is a bad card. Now, Scape Shift, some people think maybe you can put out like 10 or like 8 lands, let's say. Let's say we got 8 lands out, then you play Scape Shift, and now you have no lands left in your deck, so you're just drawing gas from then on out. Well, what I would say about that is Scape Shift, for that strategy to be good, you'd have to be playing a ridiculously slow format, a truly outrageously slow format. I don't think that this format is going to be that slow, so Scape Shift is just not going to be a viable strategy for doing that. Next up, we've got Amulet of Safekeeping. Now, Amulet of Safekeeping is gonna slow down any spells that target you, but they're not targeting you that often. It's unusual that you're targeted with a spell in limited, so them having to pay 1 more to stop it from being countered is not a big deal. They're just gonna pay it, and you're not gonna feel like you accomplished anything. The creature token thing, that is a symmetrical effect, so if you have any tokens, it does make them worse. But even if you don't have any tokens is not really a theme in this set, so you're not going to get your opponent that hard. Next up, we've got Crucible of Worlds and Magistrates Scepter. Crucible of Worlds is strictly a constructed card. It has no business in your draft deck or your sealed deck, and yeah, but definitely hold on to it because it's going to be worth a lot of money. Magistrates Scepter, this looks cool, because you can put mana in and get extra turns, and everyone knows that extra turns are so powerful. But 12 mana for a single extra turn is not a good deal. You do not want to invest that much mana into this. It would be better if you spent 12 mana on creatures and just got your opponent dead. So don't play Magistrate Scepter. Lastly, let's talk about Stitcher's Supplier and Metamorphic Alteration. Now, the Supplier is just one of these. It's a super small creature, so it's not going to be that useful as a creature itself, and it's just a huge graveyard-themed card, and this would be great for really super high synergy decks. However, once again, we're in sealed. We're not going to have that much synergy. It sounds like I'm just saying the same thing over and over, but it's true. Next up is Metamorphic Alteration. Now, this card, I'm going to come out and say I think is bad. This one's hard to evaluate, but what it does is it turns one of your creatures into the best creature on the battlefield. Now, the thing is, imagine that they have the best creature on the battlefield. Well, now you have to sacrifice a creature, not to get ahead of them, but just to be on par. That is not that great. I think I would rather just have a removal spell where I had to sacrifice a creature to kill a creature. You know what I'm saying? So this seems weak to me. It will be amazing when you're far ahead and you're just beating them in the face with, a great flyer or something, and then you get a second great flyer. But its downsides are very strong, and so I'm going to go ahead and say that it's bad. Next up, I want to talk about Arkady's the Strategist. Now, we're now into cards where I think there's a little bit to them that I want to discuss, but there's not that many because the core set is very simple. So I think most of the value was from the previous section. Now, with Arkady's, there are more creatures with defenders than I think that you should play in order to activate his ability. So the creatures that I think that you should play to activate Arkady are Dragon Egg, Gargoyle Sentinel, and Novice Knight. These are all good blockers. They have power to them, or with Dragon Egg, you get a sweet attacker after it blocks. Now, the cards that I don't want you to play in order to trigger Arkades are Suspicious Bookcase, Wall of Mist, and Wall of Vines. The 0 power thing on defenders is why defenders tend to be so bad, but the other ones that I mentioned all have the ability to turn around and do battle. Next up, I want to talk about Chromium the Mutable. Now, two things. One, when you're playing with this card, you want to have the extra card in your hand, usually, so that you can discard a card to make it hexproof. That's the big deal here, is that it gains hexproof. So that means that it can't be hit by removal spells after they cast one at it, you just discard a card and it doesn't work. Now, when you're playing against Chromium, there's a simple play pattern, which is how you beat this thing. So you have to have a flyer and an instant speed removal spell. This guy's pretty hard to get rid of. But the proper way to get rid of him is to let him attack, block with your flyer, and then cast your instant speed removal spell. If they discard a card, it'll become a 1/1, and it is already being blocked, so it dies. But if you were to, for example, have them attack, and then you're like, kill it, then they'll turn it into the 1/1, and then when you go to block, it has an unblockable ability. So you really need to make sure that you do it in the proper order so that it actually dies. If you haven't seen my basic pre-release guide, then go back and watch that. It's a fantastic video. If you follow the advice in this too, you should have a pretty darn good pre-release. Go out there, win some games. Subscribe if you want more content. I'll be uploading some M19 sealed pre-release on MTGO and my first draft there. So I look forward to doing that for you guys. And as always, I'll see you next video.